The air was thick with tension as the precinct hallway echoed with the sharp slap of a spit landing on an older man's tailored suit. The crowd froze, jaws dropping, as the young cop, red-faced and trembling with rage, realized too late who stood before him. That man, with his silver hair and piercing gaze behind wire-rimmed glasses, was none other than John F. Kennedy Jr., a name that carried the weight of history, hope, and heartbreak. The officer, a rookie named Ethan Hayes, had just unleashed his frustration on a stranger he mistook for a smug lawyer dodging a warrant. What happened next would unravel a chain of events that tested the limits of compassion, redemption, and the human spirit. Ethan was a good kid at heart, raised in a rough neighborhood where trust was a luxury and authority was a shield. At 24, he joined the force to honor his father, a veteran cop killed in the line of duty when Ethan was just 10. But the job had hardened him faster than he'd expected. Late nights, endless paperwork, and the constant pressure of a city teetering on the edge had chipped away at his idealism. That morning, he'd been pushed to his breaking point by a suspect who'd smirked through an interrogation, reminding Ethan of every lowlife who'd ever escaped justice. When John Kennedy, visiting the precinct to discuss a charity initiative for fallen officers' families, accidentally bumped into him, Ethan's pent-up anger erupted. The spit was impulsive, a reflex born of exhaustion and resentment, and the moment it left his lips, he regretted it. John, however, didn't flinch. His expression remained calm, almost eerily composed, as if he'd faced worse in his storied life. The son of an assassinated president, he'd grown up under a microscope, losing his father at 3 and his mother years later to cancer. Now 64, he'd dedicated himself to public service, channeling his grief into a foundation that supported law enforcement families. As the officers around him gasped and the room descended into chaos, John raised a hand to silence the murmurs. "Son," he said, his voice steady but laced with a quiet sorrow, "I've seen anger before. I've felt it myself. But let's talk this out." Ethan, stunned and humiliated, expected a reprimand or a lawsuit. Instead, John's words offered an olive branch, a chance to confront the storm brewing inside him. The next few hours were a whirlwind. Captain Ramirez, a no-nonsense veteran with a soft spot for troubled officers, pulled Ethan aside, his face a mix of disappointment and concern. "You've got a good soul, Hayes, but this could end your career," he warned. Meanwhile, John requested a private meeting, astonishing everyone. In a small conference room, the two sat across from each other, Ethan fidgeting, John exuding a quiet dignity. John shared stories of his father's legacy, of the officers who'd protected his family, and of the nights he'd lain awake wondering if he'd ever measure up. He admitted to his own struggles with rage after his mother's death, a confession that hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. For the first time, Ethan saw not a celebrity, but a man who understood pain. The challenge came swiftly. News of the incident leaked, and the media frenzy was relentless. Headlines screamed of disrespect to a national icon, and Ethan's face became a symbol of police brutality in the eyes of an outraged public. His colleagues distanced themselves, fearing guilt by association, and his girlfriend, Mia, a nurse who'd stood by him through tough shifts, begged him to seek help. Ethan's world crumbled as he faced suspension and a potential trial. Yet John, instead of pressing charges, intervened. He publicly defended Ethan, framing the incident as a moment of human failing rather than malice. "We all stumble," John said in a press conference, his voice breaking slightly. "What matters is what we do next." This unexpected allyship gave Ethan a lifeline. John invited him to work with the foundation, not as punishment but as a path to redemption. The first task was humbling, visiting the widow of an officer killed last year, a woman named Clara who reminded Ethan of his own mother. Clara's tears as she recounted her husband's final call home broke through Ethan's defenses. He began volunteering regularly, listening to families' stories, and slowly, the weight on his chest lifted. Mia, seeing his change, stayed by his side, her love a steady anchor. The media, initially skeptical, began to cover Ethan's transformation, turning the narrative from scandal to redemption. The turning point came months later at a foundation gala. Ethan, now a coordinator for the program, stood nervously as John introduced him to the crowd. "This young man," John said, his eyes misty, "taught me that forgiveness can heal more than anger ever could." The applause was deafening, but for Ethan, the real reward was the letter from Clara, thanking him for helping her smile again. The legal threat dissolved as John declined to pursue action, and Ethan's suspension lifted, though he chose to stay with the foundation, finding a new calling. By the end of the year, Ethan had helped raise millions for families like Clarice, his story inspiring a wave of community support. John, battling his own health issues, watched with pride, knowing his faith in Ethan had paid off. On a crisp December evening, as they shared a quiet moment overlooking the city, John placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You're proof," he whispered, "that even the darkest moments can lead to light." Ethan nodded, tears in his eyes, realizing he'd not only saved his career but found a purpose rooted in compassion. The message lingered: in a world quick to judge, a single act of grace can rewrite a life, and maybe even a legacy.